Good morning. Today's video, like a cube, comes to you in 6 parts. Part 1, overview of feeding ball pythons. Ball pythons are notoriously picky eaters. They can go on extended hunger strikes, they can get stuck on one particular food, they can decide that they don't want to eat that particular food anymore, and even more. And this can be extremely emotionally taxing, even for experienced keepers and breeders, but especially for new keepers. So today we're going to go over a few things in regards to feeding ball pythons. We're going to go over some tips. We're going to go over how much to feed, what to feed, and how often. We're going to go over how to heat and thaw out your rodents, how to actually feed them, and then what to do if your snake does go on a hunger strike and stops eating. First, one of my biggest tips is going to be to weigh your snake. This is going to come in extremely handy if they decide to go on a hunger strike one day. But ultimately, just weigh them. The frequency doesn't really matter as much as the consistency. I do my hatchlings weekly, and then all of my breeding animals bi-weekly. You can do it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever works for you, as long as you're keeping a record of it, so that if they do go on a hunger strike, you can compare that and see if they're losing any kind of weight. Like I said, the frequency doesn't really matter, the measurement unit doesn't really matter, the particular scale that you use doesn't really matter, as long as you're consistent with it. I personally use a kitchen scale that measures in grams. That's what works for me and for my collection. But whatever works for you, just make sure that it's relatively consistent and that you're doing it with some regularity. Part 2, what to feed, how much, and how often. So to start, I always recommend feeding frozen thawed, and that's what this video is going to center on. Feeding live, it can cause unneeded stress to the rodent, as well as potential injury to your snake, especially once you get to small, medium, and large rats. They can deliver a pretty nasty bite, which can actually kill your snake. So you want to try to stay away from feeding live as much as possible and really try to focus on frozen thawed. That said, I do understand that sometimes a snake will absolutely not take anything except for live. I would still try to switch them over to frozen thawed if possible, but making sure that your snake is eating in general is one of the most important things. I do have one that's like this. I still try regularly. Hopefully this week is the week. It's what I tell myself every week, and it just never is. But I still keep trying with the frozen thawed. And then I give her a live one because it's important that she eats. But out of my 100+ snakes that I've got, I only have one that is like that, so in most cases it can be done. Now, as far as rodent type for ball pythons, there's going to be 3 that are going to be most common. You've got mice, you have rats, and you have African soft furs, or ASFs. When they're young, I've found that mice and ASFs generally work best for me, and then when the snake gets to about 500 grams, I move them over to rats. That said, if you do rats from the time that they're first hatched all the way up, that's fine. If you do ASFs for their whole life, that's fine. If you do mice when they're young, you are going to have to switch them over by the time they get to adulthood, because even jumbo mice aren't going to be big enough for an adult ball python. But any of them are okay, especially when they're young. ASFs are going to be more difficult to come by, especially frozen thawed, so that's most likely going to be an option if you're going to be raising your own feeders. Do keep in mind, though, that they aren't legal in all states, so make sure that you check your state laws to make sure that they're legal in your area before trying to acquire some. When your snake is young, you want to feed it weekly. If it's a pet, you can switch to bi-weekly once they get closer to adulthood. So if it's a male, around 1,000 grams. If it's a female, around 1,500 to 2,000 grams. You can switch from weekly to bi-weekly if you're just keeping them as a pet. If you are breeding them, though, I would recommend keeping them on a weekly schedule, because at some point during the breeding season, they're going to wind up going off of food. Both males and females will do this. So you want to make sure that you're feeding them plenty, so that when they do go off of food, they've got plenty kind of in reserve for that. But also the females laying eggs, developing eggs takes a lot, and it's going to take more calories for them to do that, so you want to make sure that you're keeping them on a fairly regular schedule. This is a general rough guide about rodent sizes. Each snake is going to be different, and there's no one set perfect way to care for them. But you can see here along the side, I've got the snake weights, and then along the top you can see the different rodents, and then the sizes are kind of listed down in the body of the chart. The big thing is you want the size of the rodent to be about the width of the widest part of the snake's body, or a little bit smaller, and you only want to feed 1 rodent per week. Part 3, thawing and warming rodents. Alright, so this is the part for the trigger warning in the video. From this point forward, there is going to be quite a bit of footage of deceased rodents, both being warmed up, fed, etc. to snakes. So if that's something that makes you squeamish, it's probably time to click away now. We're all good? We're good. So when it's feeding day, I usually take rodents out in the morning before I start work, and then I let them thaw at room temperature through the day, and then I go through and I feed my snakes after I get off of work, and the rodents are usually pretty thawed out by that point. I keep them, I literally just take them out of the freezer and put them in like these little cheap Tupperware things from Walmart. Or for the rats, I've got a little bit bigger one that I got from Goodwill for like $2. The other thing you can do if you don't want to just thaw them out at room temperature, or if you want it to go a little bit quicker, is you can put them in a Ziploc bag and put that bag in hot water. Make sure it's not boiling water or anything like that, but hot to warm water to let it defrost. Just make sure that the rodent is thawed completely. You don't want it to be frozen still in the middle or anything like that, because that can actually kill your snake. And don't use a microwave to thaw them out, because microwaves don't heat food evenly. So you can wind up with part of the rodent that might be really, really hot, part of it that might be really, really cold. Anybody that's ever cooked a Hot Pocket knows that it comes in two temperatures, still cold in the middle, and boiling hot lava. You can also thaw the rodent by just putting it directly in water, so like a bowl of water or a bucket of water. I usually don't do this because you wind up with a very wet rodent, and it can get stuck to the substrate and stuff like that. So it's just additional risk that I don't really see the need to kind of have when I'm doing my feedings. But if that works for you and you've got like looser substrate or something like that, that is an option as well. Ball pythons do have labial heat pits, so they use those to be able to pick up the like temperature signature, especially of food. So you want to make sure that you are warming up the rodent before offering it to your snake. It's possible to have a ball python that will take a frozen thawed rodent at room temperature. I do have some that are like that are really, really good eaters, but generally speaking, warming them up is going to save you a ton of headache. Okay, so this is the heat lamp that I use and kind of my setup that I use for warming up the rodents. You can see I've just got like a tray that I got from IKEA. This is just a piece of scrap metal that I had kicking around my garage that I bent. And these is just like a regular heat lamp that I got from Lowe's with a bulb in it. So let's go ahead and plug that in. And you can see I've got a couple rodents under here just for demonstration. So I usually put them under, just leave them there for a few minutes, let them warm up. Thanks to movie magic, we've now got our rodents nice and warmed up. So when you're going to feed, you want to grab the rodent by the scruff, like right behind the head. So like the head ends here, this is the neck. I usually grab them by right about here so that you can kind of do a nice little rodent dance, which you want to do to get the snake interested, that it's, make them think that it's alive and get them interested in the meal. Just make sure you do not keep the rodent under that heat lamp for too long. If you like walk away and forget about it and come back, you'll come back to the smell of a cooking rodent at best. And at worst, the rodent will have expanded in its belly and burst, and then you have that smell and mess, which I can promise you is less than pleasant. Also, if you warmed the rodent in a like bucket of hot water, it could or you thawed it out in a plastic bag in hot water, it could very well be warmed up enough already where you don't necessarily have to put it under that heat lamp or hair dryer to get it warm further. Part 4, how to feed them. Okay. So first, I know you've probably seen all over the interwebs people saying, do not feed your snake in their enclosure, take them out, put them in something separately, or they're going to associate their enclosure with food, stuff like that. This, for anything I've found, is not true. Whether it be my own experience or any research that I've tried to find on the internet, I cannot find anything that supports it being necessary to take your snake out of their enclosure into something else to disassociate their enclosure from food. In fact, it can oftentimes lead to additional stress for the animal being in a new environment, separate from where they're comfortable, and then being moved immediately after they've eaten. You increase the risk of stress, you increase the risk of them going on a feeding strike, and you increase the risk of them regurgitating their meal after you move them. So I recommend keep them in their enclosure, feed them there. It's going to be easier for you. It's going to be easier for the snake. Okay, so first, you're going to need a set of feeding tongs or forceps. These are the ones that I use. I recommend using something that's at least like 12 to 18 inches long Anything shorter than that, and you are going to run the risk of getting tagged by one of your snakes, especially if it's a bigger adult one. In fact, the only time I was ever bitten by an adult ball python was one of mine. I had some dinky little like 8 or 10 inch tongs, and she missed the rat and got my hand. Luckily, she noticed it immediately and didn't like bite and wrap or anything like that. She let go immediately, but it was still less than pleasant, and the very next day I went out and purchased these. So we'll do a couple of examples here. Some of these are going to be great eaters, some of them may take a little bit of persuading, so I'll try to give you a little bit of variety to show you kind of how I do that rodent dance with each one. Part 5, what to do when your snake won't eat. Okay, so the first thing is breathe. It's gonna be okay. Stay calm. First, you want to check your parameters. Check the temperature, check the humidity, make sure kind of everything is within the acceptable range for a ball python. Continue to offer your snake food on its regular schedule. If it doesn't eat today, throw out the rodent. Try to feed again next week on your regular feeding day. Don't try to feed them day after day after day. It's only going to increase their stress and extend out any amount of feeding strike that they might be on. So if they're going an extended time, like many weeks without eating, make sure that you're keeping an eye on their weight and look for signs of illness. So anything like bubbling around the nose or the mouth, open mouth breathing, that might be a sign of like respiratory infection. If you see anything like that, go to a experienced exotic vet near you. But outside of those things, it's probably something normal and they're just on a feeding strike. Earlier, I know I said it's pretty common if you're breeding ball python for them to go off food for a portion of the year. This is also fairly common even if you're not breeding them, especially once they hit adulthood. Don't be surprised if there's months that your snake goes off of food at a time. One of my males, whether I'm breeding him that particular year or not, regularly will go off food for at least 5 to 6 months. It's like clockwork every year. No amount of anything I offer him is going to change it, and then once he's done, he picks right back up and starts eating again. Also, it's pretty common for them to go on a bit of a hunger strike once they get to around 1,000 grams. In the hobby, this is typically referred to as the 1,000-gram wall. Again, same thing as everything else, just continue to offer them food, stay patient, don't get frustrated. When they're ready to eat, they will. Now, if you get to a point where it's been a good long while and they're starting to lose weight, you may want to start to switch some things up to try to entice them to want to eat. Switch out their substrate, maybe rearrange their enclosure, You can offer them different food types. So if they're eating rats normally, maybe offer them a mouse. If they're eating mice, maybe offer them a rat. Just try to switch it up a little bit. And if all else fails, you can always try to offer a live meal. I recommend this as a last resort. Basically, your snake's starting to lose weight. You've tried everything else. You've tried switching things up. You've checked your parameters. And you just need to get food in them of some sort. You can always offer a live meal. Like I said, use this as a last resort because it's very possible that your snake could get stuck on live, and then you've got to go through the process of switching them back over to frozen thawed, which can be lengthy and kind of a pain. Overall, like I said, patience, consistency, just breathe. It's normal. I know it, especially when I was first starting out, one of my snakes went on a feeding strike for probably 4 or 5 months. And I was terrified, and I thought I was doing something wrong, and I could not figure it out. And then one day, she just started eating again out of nowhere. So be patient. Just continue doing what you're doing. Make sure that you're keeping your husbandry up. Keep offering food, but do it regularly. Do it weekly. Do it bi-weekly. Don't try to harass them every day trying to get them to eat, because it's only going to stress them out more. And part 6. The closing. As always, I hope you learned something useful today. If you have any tips or tricks that you found work for you and your collection, go ahead and drop those down in the comments. Try to help some people out. There's a like and a subscribe button down there somewhere. Not sure where. It's existing though. And I will see you next week.